Hey everybody! Welcome to Friday the 13th, the series. I'm your producer Robert, and I'm your host Robert, filling in as we take a much needed respite from Friday the 13th, the series, episode 13, to discuss our second favorite episode of television, the 90s version of The Outer Limits, season 7. Wow, really? Episode 9, which I promise will be a one and done review. 2 episodes maximum. Of course, potentially 3 if I start referencing other episodes of the series, but even then, I can't imagine needing more than 4 to fully explore. Full disclaimer, I'm not even that familiar with the original 60s version of The Outer Limits, much less the 90s run. For those completely out of the loop, the first iteration of The Outer Limits ran for 2 seasons, from 1963 to 65, and had 49 hour-long episodes. The revival ran for a shocking 7 seasons, from 1995 to 2002, with a gobsmacking 152 hour-long episodes, although, by then, hour-long meant 44 minutes as opposed to 51. How I managed to never encounter the 90s version is befoggling, and I'm almost certain the only episode of the original series I've seen is Season 2, Episode 5, Demon with a Glass Hand. Whether by chance or providence, that happens to be the episode often cited as the one Harlan Ellison claims was the basis for James Cameron's The Terminator, although he clarified in 2001 that he believes The Terminator was, in fact, actually based on another Outer Limits episode of his, Soldier. The show is often compared to The Twilight Zone, and based on a sample size of exactly 1, I'm tempted to speculate wildly that I mostly agree. Although I feel like The Outer Limits leans a little more heavily into the monster of the week format, and increases your chances of witnessing a B-movie rubber-suited creature, while decreasing your odds of passing a half hour observing 2 middle-aged men shooting pool. Although I knew they brought back The Twilight Zone in the 80s, I don't even think I was aware they resurrected The Outer Limits until I went searching for media that involved haunted antique stores. But that wasn't even my biggest discovery, which we'll get to shortly. First, I want to clarify that I have no context for what happens in this episode. I presume the show is a complete anthology, but there could be callbacks or recurring characters, or even a season-long arc for all I know. My only certainty is that this episode gets weird, and gets weird fast. Welcome to The Outer Limits, Season 7, Episode 9, Alien Shop. And we're off. Not even past the title, and this episode has taken a strange turn. Yes, you heard that correctly, and yes to your next 10 questions. The show has decided to set this episode apart from its brethren by having aliens, and not the supernatural, sire its curio shop. Swinging for the bleachers. I respect that. But how will that lofty premise be borne out? Oh, in a candlelit crypt that looks like a lost level from the '94 first-person shooter Heretic converted into a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. For an episode that wants to differentiate itself from Demons and Magic, this is hardly an auspicious beginning. And it doesn't help that our shopkeeper introduces himself as a quasi-missionary paying a penance. So despite the sci-fi pretense, rest assured we're in store for a good old-fashioned morality tale. So what kind of curios you got around these parts? Haunted monkey with symbols? Jack-in-the-box that plays itself? Tinkerbell. The man has Tinkerbell. Yes, the one you know. According to his implication, whatever this sentient flicker of energy imprisoned in a crystal ball actually is, it inspired J.M. Barrie to write Peter Pan. I will concede, I did not see that one coming. Then, with the hot dog fingers of a character from Everything Everywhere All at Once, he picks up a crystal skull while informing us he's also responsible for Nostradamus' visions. Wow, I can't wait to see which famous, profoundly interesting person this story is going to focus on. While preparing a wallet for our doomed protagonist, he further informs us he knows the objects will change lives, but not how, and speculates that so he won't get bored. Huh, that last thing seems like an overreach. I mean, you just said this is your punishment, right? Penance was the word you used? So, like Friday the 13th, the series, we're already getting a mythology that is needlessly complicated, and characters answering questions no one asked. But let's not dwell, because we're about to get the best moment of the episode when our alien shopkeeper transforms into his human incarnation. This should be anticlimactic, but the show demonstrates an uncanny wisdom in casting Alex, D-I-A-K-U-N, in the role. Who is that, I hear you asking? My new favorite actor, that's who. I'm not saying he's like Vincent Price, I'm just saying I would cast him in all the same roles. Seriously, look him up on IMDb and see if you can find even one photo in which his mere gaze doesn't make you uncomfortable. A few highlights for fans of Friday the 13th the series would probably include his appearance in the X-Files TV show and movie, Millennium, Andromeda, Supernatural, and the 2019 Jordan Peele version of The Twilight Zone. Although I lament to report he didn't work on Friday the 13th the series, he did play a deckhand in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Why do I keep drawing connections between the show and movies when this whole podcast is premised on the dichotomy between them? I don't know, but I'm definitely going to keep doing it. Yes, Alex is amazing, and the only mistake the show makes is not having a window in the corner of the screen that shows us what he's doing at all times, even when we're supposed to be focused on other characters. Many a scene could have been elevated if, down at the edge, we could see Alex turning over the "Gone to Lunch" sign in his window, then eating an egg salad sandwich on Pumpernickel. But doesn't his bald dome and baggy wardrobe remind you of Dana Carvey's Turtle Club scene from The Master of Disguise? Yep. It would seem the wardrobe department only had one set of clothes, which had to fit when he's wearing an alien head, so, sans prosthetic mask, his plaid shirt and beige sweater are too big for him. But none of that matters, such is Alex's sheer unsettling visage. Fortunately, the doldrums of the episode are staved off a little while longer when Alex saunters upstairs to assist a customer who wishes to return a, "Hey, is that Birdie?" No! It is! That is Maxine Miller, who played Birdie in Friday the 13th the series, episode 4, A Cup of Time. Wow, small world. I think I'll now headcanon that this shop is on the opposite side of the street as Curious Goods. I mean, this episode sure looks like it was shot in a nondescript Canadian Bowery. It's plausible. Well, she's decided she no longer needs an antique hand mirror that shows her a younger version of herself, and the shopkeeper is willing to take it back. But, for reasons Birdie doesn't question, he won't take it until she states outright why she's returning it so he can record it in his ledger. Yes, this show also has a ledger in which the proprietor of a curio shop also records information about his customers you'd think they'd be unwilling to divulge. This episode has been an absolute treasure trove so far, but post-opening credits, the story begins, and I'm afraid it's all downhill. In a health clinic, prospective parents Andy and Gabby are elated by the ultrasound of their child, but the mood turns dour when Gabby has to confess she can't afford all the vitamins her obstetrician recommends. When the doctor begins to suggest there are assistance programs for low-income individuals, two things happen. One, I grow increasingly certain that this is a Canadian production. Two, Andy cuts her off, and I can't go any farther without addressing the elephant in the room. Jonathan Schaech, the actor who plays Andy, looks so much like Adrian Paul, I'm forced to headcanon that Andy is a struggling actor who just missed his big break after making it to the third round of callbacks for the Highlander TV series. Anyone listening to this would probably be interested to know Jonathan not only has a prolific career and is still working, but he appeared in Joe Lynch's 2023 film, Suitable Flesh. On their way out of the clinic, Andy's self-flagellation for being an unemployed ex-con is interrupted when they bump into his dad's old buddy, Red, who absolutely would have been played by Burgess Meredith in the 60s version of The Outer Limits. In a nice bit of character revelation, Andy rejects a job washing cars at a dealership when the owner informs him a sales job just isn't available. While part of me wants to pull Andy aside and suggest he attempt to use the car washing gig as a stepping stone to the sales job, or a job elsewhere, it is commendable they're clearly establishing pride shall be his downfall. However, his plight is elevated to farcical heights when he cancels a hot dog order because he doesn't have enough change, ignores a laborer's wanted sign posted on a construction site fence, and ultimately robs a man at an ATM on a whim, only to discover the man is actually an undercover police officer. Outer Limits, are you cribbing from the Friday the 13th the series playbook? Well, that answers that. This has to be Canada. Where else would the police have the resources necessary to entrap potential ATM thieves? Andy evades the cops by loping through a wall of fog. Okay. And darting into the curio shop, whose unadorned entrance seems to be a side door leading onto a nondescript back alley in which I half expect to see Tommy Wiseau and his bros playing football. Speaking of entrapment, the shopkeeper approaches, his gaze and cadence that of a D&D bard casting a charm person spell, waxes philosophic about how his curios make him wonder about whether or not he would want to trade lives with someone else, and then suggests that Andy dropped his Australian crocodile wallet. The shopkeeper's delivery of, "They say you can learn a lot about a man by what's in his wallet," will make your skin crawl, just as surely as Michael Shannon will have you shaking in your boots by doing nothing more than eating a big sloppy sandwich. Andy steps back into a geothermal hot spring, the world's steamiest alley, before being followed by the shopkeeper, who morphs into a gruff-looking homeless guy. In his favorite bar, Andy opens his wallet to retrieve a meager $3, only to open it again after touching the hand of his friend Joe to discover a fat wad of cash. Heading home, he passes the shopkeeper and his homeless guys and tells him to get a job when the shopkeeper asks him for help getting something to eat. So Andy has two character flaws: pride and being a jerk. Can't wait to see what curio helps him confront the latter. Arriving at their apartment, Andy discovers Gabby is home early as she nearly fainted at work. Gabby's mother is present as well, and this is where, if I squint hard, I could almost see the room. Between the time period, the domestic melodrama, Andy's long dark hair, and now the introduction of the female protagonist's mother interjecting her 2 cents into the proceedings, the pieces are all there. The sound design during this scene is either surprisingly complex or unbelievably sloppy. We hear street noise, which could indicate they live in an undesirable location, as masterfully demonstrated in David Fincher's Seven, but the sounds of an elevator undermine that premise, as I can't think of what it would add. However, the post-production addition of kitchen sounds as Andy prepares a meal for Gabby off-screen were deliberate, so for that at least I can give praise. I can't be so kind regarding the casting agent. Despite giving us the goldmine that is Alex, we have a mother and daughter that appear to be about 5 years apart, so a ball has most definitely been dropped. Speaking of both them and sound design, the actresses have a whispered conversation to account for the fact they're discussing Andy, but it renders an already melodramatic scene positively soporific. Long story short, Gabby's mom isn't overjoyed her daughter married the unemployed ex-con who got her pregnant, and proposes Andy apply for a training program at the company Gabby's dad works for. To me, the most fascinating aspect of all of this is that the writers actually justify the existence of this program by mentioning the company gets a tax break for hiring ex-cons. Did I suggest this episode takes place in Canada? Forget that. This must be the Netherlands. It's a nice detail that answers a question the audience might have been asking, while simultaneously supporting the financial theme of this episode. But this scene is an exemplar of what's holding this episode back. The characters are dealing with real, severe, relatable problems, but in the most afternoon television way. Gabby has flawless skin and perfectly coiffed hair. Rugged, square-jawed Andy looks like he should be chasing Kevin Sorbo into battle on Hercules, the legendary Journeys. The apartment is plain, but perfectly cozy. They're short on cash, but can still go to a clinic preemptively. And it's only pride keeping Andy from employment with the 3 options he's encountered over the last 6 hours. What's more, Andy seems to genuinely love Gabby and their unborn child, and Gabby accepts that his pride is an issue she's just going to have to live with. All I'm saying is, these don't feel like characters at the end of their ropes, beat down by long, hard lives, to the point they're just a bundle of raw nerves. These characters seem like, at any minute, they might step into Central Perk and hang out with the cast of Friends. It probably doesn't help, everything from the wardrobe to the production design to the cinematography is so peak 90s, I keep waiting for the Dawson's Creek intro to kick in at any moment. To the show's credit, later that night, Andy calls out the whispered conversation, and Gabby definitely answers in a way that elicits a commitment from Andy to see her dad about the job, so kudos to her as well. What does Andy do instead? Why, hang out in a skate park, of course. Yeah, that seems like the most efficacious location to stare at your new wallet. While there, he bumps into a mustachioed man with a child seated upon his shoulders, and I give those descriptors for a reason. Andy checks his wallet for no discernible reason and discovers not only some money, but the driver's license of the mustachioed man. Apparently, the editor had zero faith in the audience being able to recall this man from 10 seconds ago, so we're treated to a flashback of the collision. If the skate park was the jab and the flashback the cross, the arrival of not 1, but 2 police officers following up on the ATM sting from yesterday is the uppercut that leaves me flat on my back wondering what happened. I am not ashamed to admit I would have never guessed that the ATM sting operation would return as the B storyline of this episode. I am truly nonplussed. They demand to see some identification, but the script insisted on slipping in a reference to the wallet itself, with the cop delivering the clunky line, "You, your wallet. Can I see some ID, please?" Fortunately, I've seen the Wallet Inspector episode of The Simpsons, so for me, this is a perfectly cromulent question. Andy should match the description of the ATM suspect pretty closely since he's wearing the exact same outfit as the day before. Hey, now that I go back and look, I think Gabby was too, in the one brief moment we saw her being put into a cab by Andy to take her to work. And hold on, she addresses the fact she shouldn't be taking a cab they can't afford, but she does, and even kisses Andy goodbye. See what I mean about the stress of their lives and relationship not ringing true? Back in the moment, I'm not sure how identification will confirm or eliminate Andy as the ATM suspect, but I suppose it's a common police opener, especially if they've got nothing else, and they would see he does have a criminal record if they had access to a computer, which they don't. But I'll look the other way on that one. Andy is saved from turning over his ID by the arrival of a priest who knows him by name and vouches for his character? I wish I hadn't tied my metaphor to a three-punch combination. I guess this would be getting curb stomped after you've hit the ground. It works, and the constable moves on, and then, probably because parks are generally cheap to shoot in, we get a little extra scene in which Andy actually berates the priest for judging him, and basically tells him it's pretty easy to pass judgment when you've spent your whole life living in an ivory tower. In a dark turn, the priest claims he's seen things and made choices Andy can't imagine. But, as with everything else, this implication is nerfed to within an inch of its life and feels completely innocuous. But Andy, my dude, priest just kept you out of jail and you didn't even say thank you. I think your persecution complex has moved beyond simple pride, and the needle might now be hovering somewhere right around high-functioning schizophrenia. But no time for that. Andy checks his wallet and discovers a golden cross. Being a priest and all, you'd think that'd be a crucifix, and I guess the priest keeps it in his wallet? It's hard to say because the rules seem arbitrary and keep changing. I mean, sometimes ID gets transferred with the money, sometimes not. This time only a cross was transferred, and when this transfer occurred, a little trail of golden energy flowed from the priest's hand to Andy's shoulder, which I reluctantly point out, neither of them noticed. Andy heads back to his favorite dive bar where, only now, does he ask the bartender to check a $20 bill to see if it's real. Makes sense, but he's been spending the magic wallet money for a day now. Probably should have looked into that earlier. This scene serves a second, odd function, to have Ol Red deliver the backstory that Andy's father is a war hero, which, surprise, surprise, Andy resents because his dad never took a chance again. Dude, I don't think it's the world that has the problem. I think it's you. If you like the horror genre as much as we do, you can preview the horror comic book Requiem for a Psychopath right now for free at the Inner Demon Entertainment website. Imagine a world in which horror film slashers are real. Then imagine a troubled teen bringing one out of retirement to help him take revenge on his bullies. It was written by me and drawn by friend of the show, Stephen Yu. Again, that's Requiem for a Psychopath on the Inner Demon Entertainment website. And if you dig it, please either review and rate it 5 stars on Amazon, or don't rate and review it at all. Ratings of less than 5 stars send the algorithm into murder mode for some reason. Thanks. I hope you enjoy it. Andy returns to the unnamed curio shop, and when he can't find the shopkeeper, just heads on down into the crypt. Cornering the shopkeeper, he asks, "What are you doing to me?" before holding up the wallet to ask, "What is this?" which does nothing to disabuse me of my belief in his egocentrism. The shopkeeper assures him he isn't doing anything and that he doesn't intrude on his customers, but lets them make their own choices. Fine. He continues that they have a similar philosophy in India. Okay, where are you going with this? Then he flatly states, "They abhor violence." There it is. It's like if someone heard Louis C.K.'s bit about how come racist comments are never positive and decided to give it a whirl. The shopkeeper proceeds to hand Andy a box with a fist-sized hole in it while telling him that they catch apes in India by putting a sweet nut inside a box with a hole bigger than the ape's paw but smaller than the nut. Great, so now you've got an angry ape with a blunt force weapon. I'm still not clear on how you catch it. While this happens, the shopkeeper's eyes swirl with golden light, and Andy becomes disassociated from reality. No idea why this happens, and it really wasn't necessary to buttress Alex's hypnotic performance with CGI effects. The guy is the snake from the Jungle Book at all times. Before Andy leaves, the shopkeeper suggests a baby carriage that his wife might like. When Andy questions how the shopkeeper knows about Gabby, the shopkeeper assures him he mentioned her yesterday. I would absolutely omit this exchange from my retelling, except that it broke the fourth wall for me and made me feel like I was the one being hypnotized. I thought this was a case of a nearly omniscient being knowing something he shouldn't, revealing it just to mess with the protagonist. After all, Andy didn't mention Gabby the first time, they just talked about the wallet. When I went back to their previous encounter, I discovered Andy actually did mention returning with his wife, but not that she was pregnant. Okay, my mistake. But then, when I returned to this present scene, I realized the shopkeeper never actually said Gabby was pregnant. He just said she might like an antique baby carriage, and I created the false memory that he said she was pregnant. So, well played, Outer Limits. I don't know if you intended to bamboozle me, but if you didn't, I don't know why this bit of padding is here. After the commercial break, Andy heads to a jewelry store where he gets Pretty Woman, then heads outside to bump into strangers until he has enough money for a ring. Each of these bumps gets the golden light effect we saw for the first time with the priest, so I have to believe these are for our benefit only and can't be seen by any of the other characters. Full disclosure, as I wrote the previous line, it occurred to me that it just doesn't seem possible they use that effect for every magical robbery except the first time, in the bar, so I went back and, despite watching that scene a half dozen times, it's there. Blink and you'll miss it, but they cut to a close-up of hands as Andy stops his friend Joe from picking up the wallet, and yeah, it happens. Man, this episode is really getting inside my head. Speak of blink and you'll miss it, the episode attempts to sneak one past us right after cutting to the next scene. Gabby enters their dark apartment, and Andy runs up behind her to cover her eyes and state, "Surprise." And I do mean state, as the word surprise has never been uttered in a less emotive manner. But that's not the issue. He doesn't jump from inside the apartment, maybe behind the door or something, but from the very hall she just entered from. I think the idea is that he just happened to bound up the stairs at the exact moment she stepped inside, but I can't fathom why they staged it that way and not the way I just suggested. Andy has been a busy little beaver, not only stealing enough for the ring, but enough to completely redecorate their living room. Despite his dubious excuse he won the lottery, Gabby instantly reaches the only logical conclusion, that he's committing crimes again, and still doesn't show a lick of emotion about it or offer any real pushback. The only time her calm facade is momentarily shattered is when Andy suggests they get Father Pat, the priest from the park, to officiate the proper wedding they never had, and she informs him Father Pat died a year ago. Okay, I had considered that was the shopkeeper in disguise, but he specifically told us he doesn't intrude, and that was most definitely interfering. Am I to believe a creepy alien curio shop proprietor is a liar? Ridiculous. This moment also has some of that ambiguous sound design I mentioned earlier, with a car alarm going off, then being silenced. Could they really not afford to do a second take, pickup, or ADR session? But in a bid to win the title of Most Unfazed, Andy has almost no reaction to seeing a ghost earlier that day. Only at a restaurant does Gabby again prod about where he got the money. Andy finally gets angry and loses the contest, and to her credit, Gabby finally shows some initiative and storms out. Outside the restaurant, the episode takes a real Pulp Fiction turn when the shopkeeper, disguised as the homeless guy, leaps out with a knife to mug Andy. Doesn't intrude my ass. Failing to fight the shopkeeper off, Andy pleads for him to take the money but leave the wallet, which the shopkeeper does, before running off. Andy not only ends up with a bleeding hand, but now has the same tattoos on his fingers as the homeless guy? Okay. After the commercial break, Gabby cleans his knife wound, and Andy finally confesses how he's been using the wallet, complete with a demonstration of its awesome coin purse emptying power. As Gabby grills Andy about where he obtained a haunted wallet, it's implied the curio shop exists outside space and time, when Gabby argues there are no stores on the street Andy cites. As she packs a bag to leave him, the Emotitron 2000 finally registers a little spike, and after I confirm the findings, yes indeed, a little emotion is shown. Kinda wish this had been the baseline and not an outlier, but I'll take it. Andy gives in and swears he'll return the wallet and take a job with Gabby's dad. 90s problems. Oddly, the next day, Gabby once again takes a taxi, which the show earlier considered a luxury. Uber strange, as absolutely nothing else of import happens in this scene. Actually, this also meant shooting an exterior shot on a real street. Seems like a lot of expense and hassle for complete padding. Speaking of padding, the very first thing Andy does after saying goodbye to his wife is to purchase flowers for her. Is he going back to being poor or isn't he? Also, are you going to carry those around all day? Andy is stopped in the street by Joe, his bar buddy, who informs him Ole Red finally hit the jackpot of their betting pool. Conveniently, this happens right outside the bar, so in they go. Everyone is getting a cut of Ole Red's payout except Andy, and Andy just can't abide seeing his friends happy, so he works his way around the room congratulating them as he steals their money. This happens in slow motion, which really draws out the inevitable. At this point, I think we have to concede Andy is an anti-hero. Not an anti-hero, an anti-hero. An anti-hero follows a moral code of their own making, not society's. A hero, in the classical sense, is mostly great but has one fatal flaw that proves their undoing. Well, Andy is the opposite of that. He's mostly a garbage person. Not a garbage person, but you get it. He's terrible in almost every way, but has the one redeeming quality of genuinely caring about Gabby. Just not enough to, do anything for her. I can tell you now that Ole Red has worn fingerless gloves the entire episode without spoiling what's about to happen, because there is no way you would ever connect the dots on your own. In fact, I'll go you one step further and even tell you that we learn in this scene that Ole Red wears the gloves to hide the melanoma covering his hands, because no sane person should be able to draw a line from that information to Andy's inevitable comeuppance. Before we get to Andy's ironic punishment, I will applaud the episode for subtly hinting at this moment by having Ole Red visit the medical office earlier and dropping a line about having a little rash. However, that begs the question, why does the bartender know Ole Red has cancer, but not Andy? If I was Andy, I'd be crushed. Your dad's old friend not only didn't feel like he could tell you when you bumped into him at the clinic, he lied to your face. Ole Red, the guy you presumably see every day at the dive bar, a place where it's safe to assume word will get out and eventually reach Andy. Of course, this is all so Andy can be shocked when he finally has to pay the piper. Yeah, Andy has cancer now, which he accidentally swiped from Ole Red. And I'm telling you in the least dramatic way possible because it doesn't make a lick of sense. So I guess the wallet always steals money, once an ID, but never credit or debit cards, sometimes other stuff in the wallet, or maybe elsewhere on the body, finger tattoos, and skin cancer. I see no inconsistency here. Move along. Andy emerges from the alley mist, possibly the worst stripper name of all time, to discover the curio shop is gone. Once again, this happens in slow motion, when it feels like it would both be more appropriate for the character and more exciting for the viewer if he ran in. That's what the Twilight Zone would have done. Probably would have tossed in a jaunty Dutch angle to boot. Just saying. After the camera circles around Andy to reveal the door is gone, Andy looks down the wall and the camera executes a dynamic lateral movement to reveal nothing. I mean, technically, some heretofore unseen graffiti, but nothing of import. It was camera movement for camera movement's sake, and complete filler. While we're here, there's a street sign for Sewell Lane tucked into the absolute corner of the alley where no real street sign would actually be. It's only there so Gabby could earlier pin down where Andy got the wallet and inform him, and really the audience, that there's no store there, which makes me wonder how much shopping this woman does in fog-choked back alleys. But Andy said the name of the street, and we didn't need this sign to justify how he knows, since this city seems to be entirely comprised of only 3 locations. And now that I'm on a rant about the details of this alley, the mist or fog or smoke or whatever it is really bugs me. It's meant to feel like a mystic portal between worlds, but it just isn't. It exists whether or not the store does, and the cops that were after Andy earlier ran right past the curio shop, so this little stretch of industrial alley doesn't exist outside space-time. I don't know, maybe it served the function of hiding Andy for a moment to explain why the cops didn't see him enter the store? It doesn't matter. None of this matters. Andy punches a brick wall, and I think the cloud of white dust produced is meant to be magical, but we cut to a series of flashbacks so quickly, I'm not sure. It's a weird transition effect, and they're going to keep using it as they cut between Andy hitting the wall with his cancer-ridden hand and a flashback of Andy confronting the shopkeeper. now a little tighter on their faces than before, in soft focus, and at a Dutch angle. Hey, there it is. We revisit the anecdote about the ape and the sweet nut, but this time, the shopkeeper pedantically informs Andy the ape could be free if only it released its grasp on the nut. Wow, did Andy really not draw that conclusion from the first telling? I mean, even I'm piecing together that the swirling light effect we saw in the shopkeeper's eyes and the distorted reality effect used on Andy earlier were meant to indicate they shared some kind of telepathic moment we couldn't see, which is now being revealed. Of course, as I just stated, that esoteric knowledge was simply the conclusion to an allegory anyone should have been able to reach sans 11th hour repressed memory revelation. Only now, courtesy of Andy's still bandaged hand, and honestly, probably the shopkeeper stating, "The future is in your hands," do I realize how much of a hand motif this episode has, and how much damage was actually done to Andy's. He got cut on one hand, has skin cancer on his hands. I'm not sure if a magical tattoo, or any tattoo, counts as damage, but there was that, and now, I don't know. He might have beat his hands bloody, but he turns around to reveal his whole face is bloody, and I think there are some makeup appliances meant to evoke late-stage melanoma. So regarding his hands, it's probably that. In a truly baffling moment, Andy collapses, digs wads of cash out of his pocket, looks to the heavens, then glances back down to discover a stack of bills he was holding has become the wallet. Why the magical transition? I raise my hands in surrender. The wallet glows, reality shakes, and we travel back in time to the moment Andy first picks up the wallet in the curio shop. Having some vague memory of his alternate reality, he hands the wallet over to the shopkeeper, who tries to tempt him one final time. Oh, I'm sorry. I was about to comment on the mistake of Andy still having the finger tattoos, but he notices them, then flat out states, "I needed to know all that, didn't I?" After thanking the shopkeeper, he leaves a changed man and disappears into, you guessed it, the swirling mist. We dissolve to a busy sidewalk scene where children play, and I presume postnatal hormone changes have scrambled Gabby's brain a little because she's atypically sexually aggressive, kissing Andy, grabbing his jaw, then playfully biting his nose before tossing her head back and pushing their child's stroller up the street. I would call the presence of this stroller the payoff to that foreshadowing in the curio shop, but we always knew she was pregnant, so that was almost fourth wall-breaking foreshadowing that just tells us we're going to see a stroller later in the episode. Can foreshadowing actually be that specific? Is it foreshadowing if it doesn't add anything? These are the ontological questions I never thought this episode would make me ask. When a kid on the sidewalk chases a tennis ball through the mist, wait, hang on, does this episode just happen to be located outside the curio shop? So really that was a dissolve through time, but to essentially the same location. Whatever, we're almost done. The kid finds the shopkeeper holding the ball, which he causes to levitate, then turn into the planet Earth? Why? To amuse the kid? I mean, it works. He is entertained and not terrified by the world's creepiest man with literally the whole wide world in his hands. But why? No time to figure it out because a narrator, presumably the one uniting thread of the series, chimes in to beat a dead horse with, "The pursuit of material things is ultimately pointless if one loses the things that are truly valuable to the human spirit." And while I'm doing Disney Haunted Mansion voice, to find a way out. Of course, there's always my way. Basically, the writers took Matthew 16:26, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" and filed the serial numbers off. Neat, but a Bible verse coupled with this earth hand imagery leaves me wondering, is this unnerving, bald, elven-eared, ocular albino meant to be God? Is this a demiurge metaphor type situation? Are we going full Gnostic as we cross the finish line? What is happening here? The lack of a third assistant director in the credits had me doubting my previous assertion this was filmed in Canada, but a Canadian tax credit assures me I was correct. British Columbia, to be specific. That's it for the episode, but I want to conclude by talking about those finger tattoos. Maybe it's because I've been asked to give notes so many times over the course of my life. Those really rub me the wrong way, because they treat the symptom, not the disease. The problem that needs addressing is the verisimilitude-shattering problem that the wallet, whose thievery powers have already been a little loosey-goosey, is doing something it shouldn't do at the climax of the story. It would have been bad enough if the wallet had behaved this way earlier, but it simply can't be allowed to happen at the climax, or it essentially becomes a reverse deus ex machina. So instead of rewriting the story any number of ways, they slapped a band-aid onto a severed head so they could say, but it was established earlier. To their credit, it was specifically established with respect to hands, but that still doesn't make sense, and the lesson Andy learns is an epic non sequitur. However, I am finally vindicated for hearing echoes of The Room in this episode. The melanoma reveal really was an instance of a character, apropos of nothing, casually announcing they have cancer. If this recitation has intrigued you, the entire run of the 90s version of The Outer Limits was available for free on Roku as of the time of this recording. Thanks for joining me on this strange departure, and I'll see you next episode of the podcast, when Jeremiah and I conclude, or maybe nearly conclude, our discussion of Friday the 13th, the series, Episode 13, The Baron's Bride. Take care until then. Episode Addendum. I was pretty forthcoming regarding my unfamiliarity with actor Jonathan Schaech, who played Andy in this episode of The Outer Limits. But after speaking to a couple friends of the show about his body of work, I realized he was involved with many more projects that fans of Friday the 13th, the series, might be interested in. Check out his extensive resume for yourself, but a few more horror highlights include Quarantine, Prom Night, The Forsaken, the Creepshow TV series, and an episode of The Masters of Horror that he both wrote for and acted in. He also played Jonah Hex in both the Batwoman TV series and DC's Legends of Tomorrow. He played Harry Houdini in the 1998 TV movie Houdini. He played a role in one episode of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., and finally, you might know him as Jimmy from the film Tom Hanks directed and starred in, That Thing You Do. Truly, the man has had a fascinating career, and I urge you to explore it for yourself. Thanks for listening, everyone. We know you have a lot of choices when choosing a Friday the 13th, the series podcast, and we sincerely thank you for choosing ours. Special thanks to Joshua Romeo for original music and to Stephen Yu for original art. And be sure to check out the Joe on Joe podcast, the only podcast where Joe Schlepsky discusses G.I. Joe. If you want to support our show, you can leave a review and rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If you want an occasional update on our projects, you can sign up for our newsletter at the Inner Demon Entertainment website. And if you want to complain about social media with us on social media, you can find links on our website. And always remember what Carl said to Frylock. It don't matter. None of this matters. Good night, everybody.